let's gavel this to order then. Andrew Noseworthy. Thank you for your time, bro. I know, like, you and I have kind of been two ships passing in the night at NYU a few times. I know that there was a piece. I remember I very distinctly, I was trying to remember where we first met. And I feel like I have this memory being outside of Low Theater. And
Yeah,
you had like a score or something, and you were like, I'm writing for steel drums, what should I do? And
yeah,
and
yeah,
and I don't remember what I said or if it was at all helpful or where that piece landed, but that's sort of our really only face-to-face interaction. Am I remembering that correctly?
yeah. Essentially, I think I can't remember if that was during a same trip or before or after, but it was also there was also some sort of meetup in one or two steel pan ensemble or steel pan
Mm,
orchestra because Yaz was playing in that. So we were.
right, right.
I remember I think I like sat in to watch a rehearsal and then I can't remember that there was a chat outside low and I think I sent you that score after because yeah it was like a mixed ensemble and I had the percussion part was a steel pan or mostly a steel pan and
Mm-hmm.
actually funny enough I ended up doing a couple different arrangements of that because the percussionist that played it was played here at Western in London, Ontario, Canada, and the
Mm-hmm.
percussionist who played it didn't have access to the same kind of steel pan. So
Mm, mm-hmm.
still hoping to get a performance someday of that with the steel pan version, but it ended up being multi percussion actor. So there's two
Oh,
versions,
okay.
but yeah,
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 it's the I mean, it's the one thing that whenever I'm telling or talking to people who are writing for Steel Pan is like, do all this, but then also you may not. Not everybody has access, and the quality of instruments is different depending on who you're. So
yeah,
anyway, well, I hope for your sake that you get a steel drummer to play it as well. But you're also
mm,
dating one.
that's true.
You could have
Yeah,
Yaz. Yaz is a very good band player, so have them play it. Um,
yeah, that's right, that's right. Yeah,
um,
hopefully sometime soon.
Yeah, well, okay. So I've been listening to your guitar stuff, and yeah, we have some. There's other things on the docket to possibly talk about, but I want to sort of, if you don't mind, go back to like baby Andrew and like tell me a little bit about like where you're from, like what your parents do, like what got you playing guitar, and like just in general, what got you into doing what you're doing.
Yeah, sure. In a nutshell, I grew up in a place called Labrador City, or sometimes referred to as Labrador West, which
Mm-hmm.
is in the province of Newfoundland and Labrador. But Newfoundland is an island, and Labrador is basically mostly forest kind of area attached to the east and north side of Quebec.
Mm-hmm.
It's kind of comparable to the territories, the Northwest Territories in Canada, but it's on like the far east side.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And I mostly grew up there and in a small little mining town, like a steel mining town of about, I think 12,000 people or something. And
Mm-hmm.
the next town is small. I mean, either direction is like smaller than that is for like a 10-hour drive down a dirt road. So it's very isolated kind
Mm.
of environment. So I kind of grew up there and my parents, not, I have some cousins that like play guitar, but I was never really like close with them growing up or didn't really know them because they were in Ontario or across the
Mm-hmm.
country.
Mm-hmm.
So I didn't really have like my parents like music a lot, but they don't play anything or they're not really involved with music. My mom's always been involved with like secretary based jobs and my dad was a transport truck driver. So he was a mover who would do runs and drive fuel trucks and drive and moving trucks and 18 wheelers and stuff like that.
Whoa.
So yeah, so and I
So
don't
sorry, I'm sorry that
yeah,
like there's
yeah.
my dad he drove trucks a lot, but he ended up selling at the end of his life. He was a truck salesman. He worked for Kenworth
Oh,
and
okay.
so like I'm sure Kenworth, and if I say Kenworth or International, I think you probably are like, "Yep,
Yeah.
I saw those trucks."
Yeah,
I
yeah,
think
yeah.
everybody thinks of Mack truck as being the thing, but like when I grew up it was Kenworth and International. Those were like the two. That was Coke and Pepsi in my house.
Right,
Um
right. Yeah, yeah. No, I've heard of those names
and
before for
and
sure.
it was interesting like talking to my dad about like trucker culture and the way like I learned the etiquette I have on the freeway, like when I'm
Mhm.
driving with people who maybe don't have never even thought about this stuff, like blinking your lights and knowing like being respectful of I'm overly like aware of truck drivers on the road in a way that like I'm very polite and always waving to them because I know that their life in general is really stressful and really hard and very lonely.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
that was the stuff my dad was just like, be nice to them. They are the people who are going to save your life. And so as you were saying that about your dad, like did any of that, did your dad impart any of that on you too? Like what was the conversations like in your house growing up?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, yeah, I think for sure. I mean, he was kind of always in and out as a truck driver, as you know, like always like on the road back and forth, come back for a couple days and gone for a week. And
Hmm.
he worked for various different companies because later on he would work for like a local company driving different kinds of trucks around. So there was sometimes he worked for certain jobs that were not like out and on the road. But for I would say for a good 2/3 of my life until I was 17 or 18, he definitely was on the road as a mover. And
Yeah.
I think there is some of those things that he imparted, but I think it's a lot of it I see now more when I'm like older because I feel like when I was younger I was very like academically driven, and
Mm.
now I feel like like as time has gone on I'm actually a little bit more labor driven to an extent. I don't even know if that really makes sense,
Yeah,
but
explain that a little bit.
I
What do you mean by that? I think I know
I
what you
mean
mean, but
yeah, yeah. Well, I think it's like when I was younger I was really like really book smart in a lot of ways and not like really like good with my hands and stuff like
mm,
and it kind of transferred over to a lot of things. Like I was always interested in like video games and computers as a kid rather than like cars or like trucks or like things like that, which was interesting in lab because in Labrador like everybody owns like a snowmobile. Like you can actually drive snowmobiles on the roads
mm,
from
mm-hmm.
I don't know, December until March. Like snow is there from October until April or so.
Yeah, and it's
Like
not
it's
like having a snowmobile is not like a charming luxury.
no,
It's like like the first time I went to Winnipeg, my friend Julian Pelicano
right.
is the conductor there. I went to Winnipeg and people are like ice skating to work. And I was
Yeah,
like, "Oh,
yeah,
that's
yeah.
cute. That's cute." And I'm like, "No, that's their shoes to get to work." You know? Like
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah,
yeah, it
yeah.
snowed in Ohio when I grew up, but like never for long enough that I needed blades in order to get to school, you know?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I always tell people like when I was in New York and they would hear I was from Canada, like very rarely did they know of like the place that I was from or know what that's like about. Like really they know Canada as like Toronto and Montreal and maybe Vancouver or something like that.
Right.
And I feel like a lot of people in the States have like this conception, and it is cold in Canada, and they think that like there's snow all year round and it's really cold and it's very like all this kind of stuff. And I feel like they think about those things and then they think like Canada is like Toronto or Montreal. And Toronto and Montreal are not really like that. But where I grew up is like that. So
Well,
it's always kind of funny, you know?
most of Canada is that. I mean, like
Yeah,
the
yeah.
major metropolitan areas, and I may be ignorant on some stuff here, but like are basically on the border with the U.S. You know,
Exactly.
for all
Yeah. They're
intents
all
and purposes.
southern.
But Canada's massive, and most of
Yeah.
it is ice and cold,
Yeah.
and that show
Yeah.
Ice Road Truckers. Like
Yeah.
it's
Yeah, as soon as you get into the northern parts
yeah.
of any province, you start getting into that stuff. So, but on the labor thing, I think that like I was never just like a really kind of like I don't like to get my hands dirty, I guess. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
And it's I don't mean to say like that my dad isn't like a really smart guy because he is a really smart guy, but he was always a manual labor kind of worker of some sort. But the funny thing is that like grind mentality is what I ended up like bringing into music to an extent.
Mm-hmm.
So like once I started getting into music and like that became really like my life from like 13 onwards when I started playing guitar. Basically I just like picked up a guitar because I wanted to start playing like Black Sabbath and stuff. That was really it. It was like I was into like
There's
Black
no
Sabbath
shame
and
in that
Iron
game,
Maiden
man.
and
There's no shame in
yeah,
that game.
that was it. I was just like learning like Paranoid start to front, basically like that record. So that was like that kind of stuff when I started playing guitar when I was like 13. I was into all those classic metal bands, and then I started getting into hardcore and melodic death metal, and I was into a lot of prog in later high school and stuff. So there's a whole thing. But I think throughout that whole thing, like I brought this kind of like grind and workers kind of mentality that he had from before, that it was about like grinding and working hard and putting in like the time to do stuff and putting in like the hours to do things and like
Mm.
living inside something and like really committing to something, but then also even just like lugging gear and stuff, like, and now I find myself almost even like drawn to that. Like, I think when I was even at NYU, I would end up helping out at the percussion moves afterwards. We might have even crossed paths in that when I was
Yeah.
a student there. Cause like I knew a bunch of the percussionists and I would always just end up like helping them because I'm used to lugging amps and I'm used
Mm-hmm.
to
Mm-hmm.
like the only vehicle I ever owned was a van and we would pack up to go play like band shows to 10 people in teen centers. And, I'm used to that kind of stuff, I guess. So
Yeah.
it's kind of weird, but yeah, I think,
Well, that's, I mean, there's a lot of bells going off in my head as you're talking too. And when you say the word grind, I mean, that's something, how old are you, if you don't mind me asking?
no, I'm 30.
30. So
Yeah.
I'm 42, and there's enough, I'm seeing some sort of like percolations of pushback against the word grind, or the idea of like, and hustle, maybe I don't even like that word
Mm,
either necessarily, because there's a lot of implications there, but just the
yeah.
like, if you want to look like Arnold Schwarzenegger, steroids, yes, you could do that too, but let's cleave those out. But like, there's just a lot of bench presses he's done in his life to get that skill set to the point where he can do it at 2 a.m. or 9 a.m., and he knows exactly what muscle. I don't want to be a bodybuilder, but like in music, I'm very aware of like the 12 hours a day I practiced in grad school at Yale, like where I wasn't
Hmm.
hanging out with my girlfriend when I wanted to be. Thankfully, she's my wife now, and like we survived that time. But
Yeah.
she's a pastor, she's a Lutheran pastor, and I see the same need for the, like, no one is going to tell you to work.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah. Yeah.
you have to, like, she gets up, she has to write her sermon, she has to write a new piece every Sunday and then perform it. And there's a grind to that, where some weeks for her go great. Some weeks I can
Hmm.
tell that she's like only seeing 3 words ahead of what she's written. And I'm like, I know what that feels like. I'm there a
Yeah.
lot, I know that feeling, baby. But then there's other weeks where she grinds it out and she's reading it 3 sentences ahead of where she's at.
Yeah.
And I'm kind of curious for you, like, the line for me where my grind stops, where I'm unwilling, where I know I'm actually grinding, I've met bone and I'm just sort of like
Yeah.
grinding down and I'm not actually getting anything back.
That's a good
Um,
way to put it. Yeah. Yeah.
that line for me has gotten farther and farther away from me, or at least I'm
Hmm.
willing to push and push. And I'm kind of curious for you, how have you sort of tracked that line for yourself the older you get?
Yeah. I think one of the bigger things I've tried to do over the last couple of years is I don't know if I've necessarily always been like tracking that line to an extent,
Mm,
but I try to like set aside dedicated time where I like don't have to do that, where I can like recharge. So
mm,
I try to like set aside, which I guess is all part of it anyway. But like before, I used to just like I would sit down, whether it was practicing or like writing or like working on a recording for something or whatever it was, and I would just sit down and I would say, okay, I'm just going to do this until I feel like I can't do it anymore. And I'm just going to like do it. And maybe that'll be a couple hours, maybe that'll be 6 hours, maybe that'll be whatever. And now I feel like when I sit down, I try to sit down and I say, okay, I'm only going to do this for like 3 or 4 hours, but I'm going to do it like really focused and intense for those 3 or 4 hours. And
mm-hmm,
then I'm going to step away from it. And really I had to start doing that about a year and a half ago, because I was just, when I was at the dissertation proposal stage
mm-hmm.
of this degree, I was just getting like so burnt out by writing that proposal. And
Yeah.
like it was the writing part of it. And then I felt myself also feeling like that last spring with one movement of the my dissertation piece, which is an electric guitar concerto. And I was actually even mentioning this to like a family member earlier about like how one of the things that annoys me so much about this stuff sometimes is that I always need to like put in the time to feel like I'm like doing something with it. But sometimes the results are never, which I'm sure you definitely relate to, and everybody does, the results are never actually indicative of like that. You know what I mean? Like the actual like what comes out doesn't necessarily show always. Sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't. Like I took like I don't know, I took like May until September to write like a 2.5 minute interlude movement of this. Now, granted, it was fast and it was very dense, but
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
it was like, half a year to write a 2.5 movement. And then last week I sat down and I wrote 3 minutes. Like, you know what I mean? Like
Yeah, yeah.
of something else. So it's like, I'm just trying to like balance that stuff out. Like I can definitely feel it, but I try to like also like give myself that recharge time and say, okay, if I'm going to do this, I'm just going to focus intensely for that time. And
Mm-hmm.
then I'm going to step away, because the next time I come back at it, I'll feel good about it. I won't feel exhausted, I guess. I don't know if that makes sense.
Yeah, totally. I mean, this is probably like 9 or 10 years ago at SOCI. We had Martin and Drew from Matmos came down
Mm-hmm.
and gave a lecture, and it was and those guys, it's just like drinking out of a fire hose with both of them when they're talking. But they said something. Drew went up because he's like, listen, we're experimenters. Like, and the definition of an experiment is you're doing something for which the outcome is unknown and unpredictable. There's just no way you can predict what's about to happen. And so he wrote on the board, recipe does not equal cake. And I was like,
There you go.
Like, oh yeah. Like you can have a recipe. Your intentions don't always necessarily equal the results, especially in art in particular, when a lot of what you're doing, intentionally speaking, might be very personal. I've written a lot of work about my dad's death from ALS, and there's a fine line I walk there of like, okay, this means something to me, very specific, that is something I can't really explain to anybody else. How do I present it in a way that doesn't force everybody else? Because nobody else has that particular experience in their life, or somebody might, but then sometimes I want to force everybody, and then like, because I want that, and then the results aren't necessary, but but I think just to sort of encourage you along that path a little bit, like, if I've done 10 versions of a piece about my dad, I would say one of them worked.
Right.
One of them worked really in the way that I unintentionally wanted them to work, like, and so there was just 9 abject failures in front of people, that took me to get to that one. And so, like, as you're writing, like, what are some failures for you? Like, when I say failure, I don't mean like something happened and so you're never going to do it again, but what's something where maybe your recipe was like, yeah, got this recipe, and then you put the cake out there and everybody's like, why'd you make a carrot cake? And you're like, bitch, I made a spice cake. like is there any moment for you where you had that experience and that really sort of made you tease out a little bit of how you craft something?
I mean, I think like I'm trying to think of a really good example of that, and I feel like most of the examples of that are always kind of time dependent of when I kind of come back to them or things like that. And I've had a lot of, I feel like very fortunate that I stick with something, or that I don't like give up on something, because I feel like that was like that with maybe this is a good example because I've had a couple other pieces like this, but like I wrote this between my undergrad and my master's. I wrote this really weird synth concerto. So I wrote this really weird, like, like those Korg monotrons, those little micro synthesizers.
I just saw Fong Tran gave a show at Brooklyn Bound the other night, and it was mind blowing. But he was using one of those.
Yeah, exactly. And me and Fong talked about it a lot because when I lived in New York, we were roommates actually, and we met before there, and we did NYU at the same time, studied with Michael, etc. Right. Mm-hmm. So we've talked about a lot of those things. But yeah, right before I submitted my master's applications, I wrote this 3-movement, 15-minute, really weird Korg monotron concerto, and it's kind of really silly. It's kind of like an anti-concerto in some ways. It's kind of like a meta, kind of like, you know what I mean? It's very strange, and it's definitely kind of quirky and supposed to be funny in a way. Mm-hmm. And so I wrote this piece, and I was like really stoked on it, and my former like composition professor was really stoked on it. And it also didn't, speaking of the grind, it also didn't feel like a grind to write it. Like I just like churned it out. It was my first ever like piece with orchestral instrumentation with that long, but I felt like I did a good job at orchestration considering my level at the time. Mm-hmm. I was really happy with it. I even like recorded samples of like some of the string extra techniques, and I made like sampler instruments in Ableton to like do a good mock-up of like the overpressure and shit like that. Like mm-hmm. I really went all in on it. And then even my former teacher at my undergrad was like, this is excellent, you need to send this to people. I'm gonna like send this to an orchestra in Toronto. Mm-hmm. And it was like, that was in 2014 or something like that. 2014 and early 2015. And besides one movement getting like a bit of a reading kind of performance in like a small space and another small student reading of sorts, that piece didn't really get a decent performance until like 2019. And a lot of people really like made fun of it, which is really hilarious. Like I had a lesson with this one guy who said, like, why are you doing this? Like, and this is like not like some conservative guy. This was like an electroacoustic, like very, very experimental like composer who worked with Max and did all sorts of different stuff. And he was like, no one's gonna play this. Like he's like, if the Toronto Symphony Orchestra programmed this, people would walk out and want their money back. Like this is so silly. And like I remember I sent it to like multiple calls and multiple things and got nothing in cold call with it. And then so I thought, I was like, well, like maybe it was like kind of a stupid idea. Like I had fun with it. I even put it on like master's applications, and like the folks at MSM listened to like a little bit of it and then like shut it off in the interview, and we're like, anyway. It was just like nobody like really cared for it. But then the funny thing was is that, so I felt like the piece was a bit of a failure. And then in the summer of 2019, the Canadian National Youth Orchestra had an opening in one of their like student reading things that they had a call for, and an email got shot around and said, hey, do you have anything to throw into this? And I was like, they're not going to do this, but what the hell, like I'll throw it in. And then I get a call, it's like, yeah, we're going to read it next week and we're going to play it. And these are all like elite caliber, like late high school, early undergraduate kids, but they played it and like nailed it, and I got a good recording of it. And they were all like really stoked on it. Like I remember multiple players like coming up to me after and being like, this is so fun. Like, I love this piece. Like, thank you for writing this. And the conductor was like, beautiful colors and all this kind of stuff. And I'm like, man, I wrote this like 5 years ago. Like, so I don't know. I don't know if that's a good example of like a failure, I guess. But like, I think I definitely felt like that piece was kind of this weird, underappreciated, like I wrote this thing, I thought it was this, everybody else thought it was something else. So sometimes maybe right people just need to come across it, right?
Well, I think it's a good example of like, yeah, it's like sometimes stuff just needs to sit in the fridge and grow mold a little bit.
Yeah.
Get a little patina on it so that, I wish the way music was digested by people was more calculable, and we could just be like, oh, this piece will take 3 years for people to really understand it or whatever. But also it just takes the right person, A, to be pushing it, you, and then B, somebody just to take a chance and be like, yeah, sure, we'll program this, And that decision may have been that the person who decided to program it may have thought for 3 seconds about it and been like, we just need a spot to fill on the show. Like, and that's the only investment they have in Andrew Noseworthy's music.
Yeah.
But if what it did was result in this thing, anyway, it's a good example of not just throwing anything away. We had dinner at Merce Cunningham's in the loft where he and Cage lived together, and he was telling us stories. I was like, tell me, like, what's the thing I need to know about John Cage that nobody else knows?
Yeah.
He's like, he sat at the dinner table, chain smoked cigarettes, and wrote music all night.
Yeah.
Every night. And he threw it away every night. I was like, what? He's like, yeah, it's like 95% of John Cage's output is in a landfill in New Jersey.
Wow.
And so now maybe that's not a good example of not throwing anything away, because he threw a bunch of shit away.
Yeah.
But I think it's a good example of like, oh wow, like the grind. John Cage was approaching composing the same way your dad and my dad thought about selling trucks or driving trucks, And I think that sort of the mystique we put around the process, around the grind, around a certain composer, whether it be John Cage or Caroline Shaw or Yaz or whoever, like this idea that there's some like finger of God touches you and you have the muse and everything pours out of your pen. I don't know anybody for whom that's the case. It's not the case for David Lang. It's not the case for Steve
really
Reich.
don't identify with that at all.
It's not the case for anybody. Anybody you look, Joan Tower, like it doesn't matter who it is. Like there's a grind that they're all doing and making. I mean, I remember being at Soci and Steve. We played a piece of Steve's dance variations, and it doesn't get played very often. It's kind of a weird orchestration, like pianos, xylophones. And Steve was at Soci, and he played it, and he stopped, and he's like, I gotta say, I hate this piece.
Yeah.
And he's like, I always have, and he's like, you guys, thank you for doing it. You've actually convinced me that there's like something in there. And he's like, I still don't think it's a great piece, but like, so if Steve is having that moment, so should you, and so should everybody else. And just like leaning into that, I think is good. So I would say that's a really great example of something that, in terms of a process, you just never know. I think of somebody. One of the first live shows I saw in New York was Tristan Parrish, and he was at Tonic, this club. I don't even know if it's there anymore, but he sat down. He plugged in the CD of the 1-bit music, plugged it into a guitar amp, pressed play, and sat on a drum set and played along with it. what in the fuck am I watching right now?
Yeah,
You know, I'm like
yeah.
from a cornfield. I just graduated from Yale, and I'm like New York City, and this kid is like along with one bit music, you know. And now we're at this point where Tristan's being commissioned by the Met and by, you know, MoMA, and he's putting up these massive. But it's like that's from Tonic.
Yeah,
Like those
yeah,
huge walls of speakers Tristan's using now, like that's all from Tonic. Like that's from him sitting down and plugging in a CD into a guitar amp, you know.
yeah, yeah.
And so like yeah, it took 15 or 20 years to get to that, but it's no different.
I really appreciate that kind of thing too, and like seeing those kinds of through lines and sorts. Like I was having this conversation with actually Fong and Aaron Santillan and Adam Cuthbert recently about how like it's really weird to like, and it's kind of hard to see it in like real time sometimes too. Like it's kind of because like I like the stuff that Fong is doing on like his new album that's coming out, which I mastered by the way. It was just like was so nice to like. It felt like even though I was only like mastering it, and even though I was like, it's like not my music, and I wasn't like collaborating necessarily on it on this creative quote unquote level. Like when I heard the music, I was just like, man, I was like, this is so cool to hear because I remember like I remember like going out for drinks with you in like 2015 and talking about like the stuff that like you wanted to do. And I mean, this is only like a 6-year period. We're not even talking like 15, 20 or something like that. And it's so nice to see that kind of like those aspirations that, you know, like you talk about need to gestate and grind and then you like get to. And I feel the same thing with Adam with the different projects that they're doing with like the different kinds of identities and the different kinds of almost like avatars with different projects. And really expanding like the modular synth stuff that both them and Fong are doing. Erin is the same deal, like touring with her band and writing these like feedbacky guitar pieces and like things like that. Like, and sometimes it's also even hard to see in yourself. Like I was like saying, like, you know, like everybody's like accomplishing these things and whatever. And like, yeah, I'm writing like these pieces, I'm doing these things, but all I can focus on is like, I'm laser focused on like just finishing this degree and getting out. Yeah. And I feel like I'm like stuck in this like feedback loop during this degree, which I hear is everybody's experience with PhDs. Right. And I'm just like, and then I was thinking about the other day, cause I was commissioned by like Tim Brady.
No.
He's like a long-running electric guitarist, composer in Montreal. Him and Steve Mackey are pretty much like same age, but they're just like opposite side of the border, basically. But they're also long-time running friends. And Tim has an electric guitar quartet and has done like the pieces for 100 electric guitars and et cetera in Montreal. And I wrote a piece for his quartet back in like 2019. And I'm like super happy with the piece, and it's coming out on a recording next year and stuff. And I was thinking, I was like, you know what? It was like, in 2010, I saw him play and I was like, someday I want to write for him or write for his quartet. And now it's like 10 years later and that's happening, but it's hard to see. Right. So I don't know. It's cool.
No, it's great. And I'm finding myself at 42 talking to students, like the things that now that I've had enough data points in my personal experience with what you're saying of like, all right, I've invested in these 30 things over the last 15 years. Man, it's crazy to see how far. So that is now something I can teach an investment portfolio approach to sort of things enough now to be like, now you're not going to yield the same results maybe that I did, the exact same results, but trust a little bit that this moment that you feel like you're lost and no one's paying attention to you, or you think that your music's not getting out there for all of these other reasons, like just maybe, but also put the seed in the ground and go work on another seed and just come back, water that one. And over the long haul, yes, there will be barriers in your way that are not fair, or somebody may put up in front of you just for the wrong reasons, whatever. But overall, when you zoom out, the stuff that we're all looking at as like, that's what I want to do. It's a bunch of people who stuck something in the ground and then just kept waking up every day, putting a little bit of water on it.
Yeah. And I mean, like something I also, one of the last things I should mention on it too, that's something that I try to like ground myself in order to be like okay with those kinds of things and to not like totally go crazy or something like that. And I mean, I should also mention that, like, you know, like I should mention that if people like feel like this stuff is like making them really unhealthy, then like it's probably not for you. You probably shouldn't do it like 100%. I'm not saying everybody should like completely drive themselves to the point of like stretching themselves completely thin in order to like feel like they're successful. But like one thing that I do kind of also do is like, we're talking about like 5 or 10 year spans or something like that. And I mean, there's like so many composers who like weren't even appreciated like in their lifetime, or who had a renaissance like 50 years later or something like that. There's so many classic examples. So it's like, like sometimes it really just doesn't matter. If you enjoy doing it, you just got to grind and do it, right? So
Yeah, I mean, it's something you said. I'm trying to remember the exact way you said it. Of like, can you just say everything you said one more time, the exact same way you said it? Just this. Yeah, you don't know if what you're doing is going to have any impact,
mm-hmm.
really.
Mm-hmm.
So then you really are only doing it for yourself. Like that's the only Andrew Noseworthy Incorporated doesn't exist tomorrow if you don't get in and go and clock in, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And what you were saying about the like if it's making you genuinely unhealthy,
Mm-hmm.
or the lack of like I don't make a lot of money, bro. Like
Yeah, yeah.
I'm by my shoelaces too, and I feel like I have a relative modicum of success in the field. If I were to look at myself 20 years ago, I'd be like, yeah, bro, you did it, or
Right,
you
right.
did
Yeah.
something, but it hasn't yielded financial security necessarily. But that's something for me, the unhealthiness that injects in my life, I've decided I'm okay with that because the currency
Mm-hmm.
I get in other ways from community, from being in amongst other people. Like there's different types of currency that fills in the vacuum of my unhealth that was sucked out with the other stuff, and so
Yeah.
yeah, I think also just be careful, not you personally but people in general, like
Yeah.
a day or two of feeling really bummed out about your life in music is not a reason to throw it all away.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's the but again, like that's the rub, right? Like I can't make that decision for anybody,
Mm-hmm.
and I certainly don't want anybody to make that decision for me. Like I'm willing to get up and put my head against a millstone and be like, this is what I'm doing today,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
but I don't, I would never require that of anybody else. But if for most people who are like, I want to do what you do, it's like, all right, get over here, put your head against this millstone, because and again, like that's not the only answer. But if like people want to know what my answer is, like that's been my answer, and like you don't have to enjoy it, but this is what I'm doing today. So come on over.
Yeah, 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 yeah. No, I feel you for sure. I'm just gonna check my phone real quick and make sure it's not gonna die. Okay, we're good.
Yep.
It's totally good.
let
Just
me
want to make
ask,
sure it doesn't die on me.
let me ask you here in the time remaining. Oh, oops.
Sure.
Sorry, I just knocked my keyboard off. Two questions. What I was listening to Micro Locking 2,
Mm-hmm.
and of all the stuff you sent me, that one like really triggered me to think a lot about the guitarists in my life that I've worked
Mm-hmm.
with, and that I've admired a lot. Fred Frith is a guitar player. I mean, Fred or know of Fred. Teaches
Mm-hmm.
at, I don't know if he still teaches at Mills College or if he's retired now, but so worked with him early on. Like my second year in the group, we commissioned a piece of his called Small Time that was for
Mm-hmm.
percussion ensemble, and there were some guitars in it that we were strumming, acoustic guitars, and but that was my first time learning really of Fred's music and sort of digging into that. And there's a solo album. The cover is completely white, and I can't remember the name of the album. But like I remember
Yeah, I
listening to
mean,
that, and watching some videos of him like with chains and the guitars and all this stuff, and he kind of just tore my brain open. And plus, he's like snarky British guy who like made fun of me because I drank Diet Coke at breakfast. Like it was like the absolute right down the pike cantankerous British musician,
yeah, yeah.
and but his music really like imprinted on me in a heavy way. And then Bill Frisell was one of
Mm-hmm.
the first guitarist I ever saw live. He was playing with Paul Motion and Joe Lovano.
Mm-hmm.
And then Gray McMurray, who I don't know if you've ever crossed paths with Gray at all.
I've never crossed paths with him, but I love that record that he did with y'all. So I think
What
that's like a really beautiful record.
and the stuff that he did I don't know if he still does it with Caleb Burns. He has a
Mm.
duo that's a lot of ambient, and he would probably slap me for using the word ambient, but like
Yeah.
it's really beautiful and spacious, and just like everything was recorded in a cistern, like that sort of vibe. And anyway, just like, so for you, those were the things that were coming to my head as you were playing, but I don't want to assume
Yeah.
that those were influences for you. Like, what
Mm.
when you are what imprinted on you as a guitarist, I guess? Like, who were the guitar players that sort of let you know that you could do what you're doing?
Yeah, yeah. I should also mention before I start that too, that or before I start saying anything, that that piece is which I can't remember if I mentioned to you or not. That piece is actually, even though I have a bunch of guitar music and I'm currently writing an electric guitar concerto, that piece is a piece I commissioned from a Iranian Canadian
Mm-hmm.
composer named Saman Shahi, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But the interesting thing, or a big reason why I sent that along with some other like pieces of mine, is that that piece was really cool to do with him because it was very much a back and forth collaboration of sorts.
Mm-hmm.
Like I won't claim the composer title on it necessarily or anything like that, but we got a grant to do some really extensive, like bi-weekly for like 2 months workshopping on that piece.
Mm-hmm.
And so in a lot of ways, it's really written with like a lot of the things that I like to do in mind, like the Digitech whammy stuff.
Mm-hmm.
The use of the Earthquaker Devices Rainbow Machine pedal is like one of my favorite pedals. I use on like so much stuff, and he really wrote like extensively to use that. So it was nice because in a way it feels like it's very much like a back and forth collaboration, even though he was the one who made the score, let's say, or something like that, you know.
Mm-hmm.
But to answer your question, I mean, I think it's really like gradually changed over time. One big pillar that I always come back to is pretty much anybody who's ever been involved with any King Crimson project.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a lot of bands that I've kind of come back to or I was into when I was in high school and then I got out of them, blah blah blah. But I think like anything that's related to like King Crimson and then by that whole web has always been huge on me. So Robert Fripp and Adrian Belew and just like anybody, even like Tony Levin's work on bass, even though I'm not a bassist, just like all that kind of stuff has always been super cool to me. And then how that extends into various other groups like Talking Heads and et cetera, right? And all that proggy stuff.
Mm-hmm.
In the like contemporary classical world of sorts, definitely Tim Brady was a big influence at the beginning because when I was in my one of the first really hardcore new music only concerts I saw in my undergrad was this group called ECM Plus from Montreal.
Mm-hmm.
They're like a very large mixed ensemble that do this Generations tour every couple of years where they pick four early to mid career composers. They commission them for new pieces and then tour them across Canada and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And I saw him play as a part of the ensemble with that. And then the following year saw him do like this 2-hour concert of just solo electric guitar music for just like, so I was like, I don't have to, like, I loved playing classical guitar and that was my applied instrument in my undergrad. But I was like, I don't have to like play classical guitar recitals with one electric piece on it, which happens to be Tristan Mariah's Vampire or something like that. Like, you know what I mean? It was like, so Tim was big on that. I always come back to like Fripp and those for that kind of influence. And then honestly, a lot of other stuff ends up being a lot of my peers and stuff. Like Aaron's kind of work on guitar is super influential to me because when you compare us to, even though I'm not a really hard skilled technical kind of player or a really kind of like conservative technical player, I'm definitely a little bit more trained than her. Like I can play like contrapuntally and with fingers and I did classical guitar stuff, etc. I'm a better score reader. But like just Aaron's understanding of like texture and like harmony and chords and pacing across like a length of time is something that as a player, improviser, composer, something that really came to me, and it's all kind of guitar related because it's our like instruments. Trying to think if there's definitely loads I'm like blanking on, you know?
No, I mean, yeah, I mean, as
you
you were saying it, I was like, of course, Steve Mackey was somebody who, he wrote a piece called Blue Notes and Other Clashes that I think he then did an arrangement of with Jason. He did a duo version of it where he played all the parts on guitar with all these looping.
Right.
Like, and I just remember watching that being like, wow, I've never seen anything quite like that. And
yeah.
But is it Mark Ribot, Ribot? Not Mark Reveille. That's a completely different Mark. And also highly influential Mark, but Mark Ribot. Am I remembering? Is that his name?
Yeah.
Yeah, I saw him
ceramic dog player and stuff. Yeah.
He did a piece by John Cage, I want to say. that was really gorgeous at like a new music gathering or something.
Mm.
But yeah, I mean, guitar is one of those things that I think if I between you and me, if I could go back in fifth grade, I would practice the guitar as much as I practiced drums because I feel like I would. I'm always jealous of guitar players. There's something percussive about it. Like
Yeah.
you're holding a drum, and you know, but it's also a drum that can play beautiful chords, and my snare drum and drum set cannot do that. Maybe that's why I
Yeah.
gravitated
Yeah.
towards steel drums, because it's like the closest I could get to a guitar. But
No, man, I totally click on that. And I mean, like, and it's actually funny you'd say that because I always feel that kind of way with percussion or drums to an extent. Like, I always wish I had like learned classical percussion or had a music program in high school kind of in general that would support of that to an extent and like played percussion like concert band and stuff. Like, I always kind of wish I'd gone to that because like I've always been both as a composer and a player and everything like that. I've always been a really rhythmically drawn to rhythmic things, drawn to polyrhythmic things, drawn to like that was really my big draw to like prog rock and like mathcore and math rock and all
mm-hmm.
that kind of thing, was the weird rhythms and like those kinds of things, you know? And like I feel like I'm always like tapping. Everybody always talks about how I'm always tapping something and I'm always like tapping out rhythms and like I'm very like kind of I've always been like that with my hands, and people always assume, oh, you must be a percussionist or something. I say, no, I'm a guitarist, but like I do feel very percussively about guitar. I mean,
Mm.
even my classical guitar teacher in my undergrad, like Sylvie Prue, once said to me when we were talking about like tone, she was like, I don't think of the classical guitar as a string instrument. In fact, I wish it was never in the string categories in music festivals and in competitions because it's a percussion instrument. You're attacking
Mm.
the strings. It's plucked, right? Or whether you
Right,
use a
right,
pick
right.
or your fingers. So it's, and of course you can play it really percussively with those tap style players and stuff,
Mm-hmm.
you know? So yeah, I don't know. It's yeah, I don't know if that really answers or adds very much, but yeah, I associate the same
No, it
kinds of
does.
things, right?
I'm yeah. The just the sort of mindsets of different instruments groups, you know, and I feel
Mm-hmm.
like the more I learn, the more I feel like guitar, percussion, and harp and piano overlap in ways that most that sort of I think if we had a big party with pianists, harpists, percussionists, and guitarists, and no one else was allowed in,
Yeah.
that would be a pretty big rager. I think we'd all get in the room and be like, "Thank God everybody else is gone, huh?" Like,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
we all get along more than we
Yeah.
realize. Well, Andrea,
Yeah.
just in the
There's a
time,
weird kindred thing, you know?
yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
totally, totally. Just in the time remaining, I wanted to sort of just pick your brain a little bit about the sort of, for better or worse, the impetus for us talking. You know,
Yeah.
and I want to just cop to. I mean, my podcast is called Concert Honesty, and I just want to be honest with folks. I am glad that you commented,
Okay.
and I'm well. No, I'm just sorry. I'm just going to say some things, and it's not really thought through. But
No.
when you
Okay.
commented, I had a real bad reaction of like, oh my God, this guy hates me, and I that must be the truth. And I spent I've been spending a lot of time just thinking about like why okay, why do my feelings aren't proof of anything, right? Or at least I believe that they're not proof inherently of I'm correct about something.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I am really general. My question is sort of just large, and it's more of an observation. I'm noticing a more and more disconnect personally with my ability to communicate health in a healthy way online. Personally, I feel like I guess not communicate. Like I have no problem being like, "Hey, this was an awesome piece. Check this out," or "Hey, publish your music, and here's a link of a piece I think is great." Like that's easy.
Mm-hmm.
The minute any post goes to the next level of like, "Hey, I think you're wrong," or "I think you need to think about this," and I'm asking this question out of like, this is a big weakness of mine. I have a podcast. I will talk to anyone
Mm-hmm.
about anything. And I've done all over 300 of them between the Drumming at 50 podcasts, which were all happening during a really intense time in, you know, the new music in the world, all this stuff. Like I'm fine to do that level. And they were not easy discussions, all of them. Some of them were really intense, really not dark, but just like, it was But as soon as one comment
Yeah.
happens on a Facebook post, I'm just like, no, 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 and I shut down. And it bums me out, Andrew, because I was like, let me talk to Andrew. Let me
Mhm.
at least go that route and then lean into my fear and anxiety here. And I was right. Talking to you for the last 39 minutes, even though I've stolen 39 minutes of your life,
Yeah, it's okay.
had I known that first about you, I think my feelings would have been like, oh, well, this is easy. Like, I mean, not easy, but like, I would not have had that feeling.
Hmm. Hmm.
And I guess I'm wondering, like, do you think am I crazy, or am I like, just is my worldview completely? I have unhealthiness in terms of online culture. I guess I'm worried about myself, and I'm worried about all of us and our ability to have discussions. I don't know that we're able to do it online. I think I'm really
Mm.
worried about our ability to, because what you said was about something I was saying, like listening to different viewpoints as a way of like sharpening your own arguments. Like, I'm not saying you need
Hmm.
to agree with other arguments, but just like being like, oh yeah, that actually reinforces. I actually do believe what I think. You know, that was
Hmm.
my
Hmm.
intent, and I felt like you misread what I was trying to say, and then I
Hmm.
was in a position of like, how do I defend myself? And it's like, well, that's proof that we're not actually proof that I might be defensive, but also maybe that we're not having a conversation on a healthy premise to begin with. Like, we're trying to have a discussion on a forum where there's 4,000 other people who I don't know watching us have this discussion, you know? And so
Hmm.
anyway, I just wanted to be honest with you about like my reaction to that post as proof that like I'm a wuss with online discussions, but I'm not having them face to face. And I wanted to ask you like what do we need to do better?
Yeah,
What,
yeah.
you
I
know.
mean, I'm gonna try not to go off on like massive tangent or whatever, but there is a couple things I should besides answering that question for sure. There's a couple things I should mention that to go off of some of the things you were just saying a minute ago for sure. Um, there's there's well, first of all, I don't hate you, so
No, I
I
think
don't
I
know,
would,
like
unless you've been lying to me for the last 40 minutes. No, that was
yeah,
totally clear from the minute I went like this and
sure.
saw you. I was like, oh, okay, this is gonna be fun.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean, like, yeah, like it's. I honestly, I don't even like know you super well, so how could I, to an extent,
I
like,
know, but that's
so
my
I don't.
point.
Yeah,
I grafted a whole world's experience onto that one comment, and that's not fair to
yeah.
you. It's not fair to
No,
you, and
man,
it's not fair to me either. Like,
it's okay. I do it too. Like, and I appreciate also. I also appreciate you being like open and honest and like transparent about that too. Like about how like a comment could make you feel about those kinds of things. Like, I definitely have had like the same kind of thing too. Like where I'll post something and whether it's a slip up on my end or whether the actual response to it is actually just like not a very positive response or whatever it is. Like
mm-hmm.
it definitely like there's definitely days where like my day has been like thrown off. Like I mean, there's some very very classic examples. I mean, like I didn't do anything for the first couple days after Kendrick won the Pulitzer because I was just arguing with people online, trying to like who were saying that it was
Right,
not valid. And I was like, "Am I doing something? Like I hear you. Like, am I doing something wrong?
right.
These people hate me now. Like, like." And I
Or
think that's like
yeah,
a big thing, right?
but
Like,
also like you're having an argument about an objectively great artist. But again,
sure,
like,
yeah,
that's in defense of you. You're having the discussion on a faulty platform. You know what I mean? Like,
mhm.
like you're having the
Yeah,
right.
yeah,
You are
yeah,
having
yeah,
the right discussion.
exactly.
You're just having it on Facebook. Or
Yeah,
whatever.
yeah, and I think that's related a bit to like my comment too, because there's essentially two reasons why I commented, and the first one is that even though like I don't know you super well and we're connected on it and those kinds of things, the what you were saying in that post, this is not a bad or a good thing or anything like that, but what you were saying in that post, like the overall vibe or the overall thing you were talking about is like seeped into a lot of the posts that you make, which I think is very which I think you do on purpose and with good intentions and for good reasons. So like a lot of so it's not like that post was a one-off thing that now it's time to one-off jump in or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
Like
Mm-hmm.
it was like the stuff that you say in that post is clearly something that you think about often and that you post about often, that you talk about often, whether in person or online or something. So I figured if I had made a comment with something that's actually something of a deep dive or a jab or a critique or any of that kind of stuff, that it was at least not that I thought I was like coming off like, like coming out of nowhere or something. And
Well,
then
and
the
you made that
second,
clear in your comment too. Like
right.
I appreciated that.
Yeah, and the second reason is actually related to all the things that we were talking about at the beginning of this conversation, is that I also felt knowing a little bit about your background and a little bit about what you're involved with, and about the people that you work with, and where you come from. And I mean, I didn't know that your dad was involved with trucks either, but I do know that you came from a small, more rural based, like not a very like diverse place like New York would be, or something like that as well, you know, like, or let's say something more conservative leaning or something like that, let's say. So I also figured, okay, well, it's something that's a regular ongoing thing. And B, if I'm going to talk to him or say something to him about it, I'm actually also coming from a very similar place. Like obviously there's points of our life that are very different,
Mm-hmm.
but there's points where I think we are coming from the same place with it. And it's also something that I've thought a lot about and changed my views on over the years, something
Mm-hmm.
and stuff like that. And like something that some of the things that you said in your comment would be perhaps things that I would like 100% wholeheartedly agree with, maybe like 5, 6, 7 years ago or something like that,
Mm-hmm.
kind of before New York, to be honest, or before some other things. I just feel like, and I definitely agree with you, like Facebook is like a faulty platform. And I think that's maybe one of the biggest issues with the post, and why I posted something back that was like a critique, let's say, even if it came across a little bit more jabbing, was that, you know, like the it's a faulty platform because the what you said was framed in a very kind of blanket overall kind, how did I put this, in a very blanket or an overall kind of thing. And you don't have like you don't really have the space to like explain every little detail or every little place that you're coming from, or every, like, you don't have the space to say all that kind of stuff. So it is a faulty platform because I know that you're coming from like a positive place and you're doing that. And but when you say some things like that, it can be taken in like the wrong way, because of the platform is definitely one big part of it, you
Mm-hmm.
know. So I think it was mostly just like the absolutism, because like fundamentally, like I said in the post, I agree with what you're saying. Like fundamentally, I think, yeah, like listening to other people that do not have the same opinion as you can help you to grow, and can often very much, or very often, sharpen your viewpoints, especially like sometimes, especially with extreme things. I had this conversation a lot with one of my like oldest friends. Like there's only the 4 or 5 people that I still talk to
Mm-hmm.
from Labrador, and one of them I've had this conversation with X number of times.
Mm-hmm.
And the I just think, at least in my opinion, and from the opinion that a lot of people I've talked to, especially people of any kind of marginalized identity, be it queer or trans or a person of color or any of that kind of, or even just class, even just like any kind of class related inequity. The people that I've had conversations with, those things, it's just not as easy to make those overall or general statements, even if they, at least in my opinion, even if they're fundamentally positive or they're fundamentally what we should be doing. Because I think there's a big difference between, say, let's say taking a lesson with somebody whose music is completely different than yours, or who has completely different musical objectives, or something like that, let's say, or arguing with, not arguing, but or discussing like tastes in like movies or something like that. You know what I mean? Like,
Mm-hmm.
and I think definitely when I hear like extreme points of view on things like politics, it definitely sharpens my idea or things like that, you know. But I just feel like you and I, especially like you and I as white cis, especially straight passing men, it's like we're in a privileged position where we can kind of parse those things. But there's a lot of people that are not in privileged positions who can't parse those things, because a lot of people don't want, like, people shouldn't have to listen to somebody who doesn't think they have the right to exist. Do you know what I mean? Like, and I know that's an
I
extreme case. I know
Yeah,
that's
I
an
would.
extreme case, but
I don't
you
disagree
know,
with. I don't disagree with you. I mean, I think there's. I mean, there are balls and strikes. There are conversations that I will or will not have if I can perceive that, if I can read the room enough to that the intentions of what this person, where this person's coming from, aren't genuine. Um,
mm,
I do take issue a little bit with not with the idea that I'm in a position of privilege, but the idea that, and again, this is coming from my experiences interfacing with the Caribbean Pan community, specifically in Brooklyn. That's where that's the place where I am in the minority on a
Hmm.
regular basis in my life, where I'm hyper aware of my race more than anywhere else. More than, of course, more than in so percussion or in any other part of my life, right? I think it's made me actually, and also in terms of class, like, relatives I have who are, addicted to heroin
Hmm.
because of the
Hmm.
opioid crisis and because of a physical disability that they have had their whole life. And like, in discussions with them too, the stuff that I've come away with in those has been less of feeling like, oh, I need to do this for them because they can't,
Hmm.
and more of a like, wow, everybody thinks these people are weak and lazy and stupid and can't what I'm speaking specifically about, the stereotypes I was raised about the black
Hmm.
community, for example. They're late to
Hmm.
everything, they're lazy, like all these things. And as soon as I'm in that community, I'm aware of, oh, like, oh, laziness is absolutely not the reason. There's other reasons that I still am not 100% sure of, that I'm learning about, but that's something of like, oh wow, I can't look at this. Anyway, so it's made it increasingly difficult for me to sort of disempower a community by not having an expectation that I can have a discussion with, Kendall Williams or somebody about Ben Shapiro, for example.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah. Yeah.
the premise behind the podcast that I didn't post it out of fear, to be quite honest, because I was worried about what people are going to say. I have Sirius satellite radio, and so I'm just like, and I drive 5 hours a day, and so I have a lot of time to listen. And sometimes what keeps me awake and keeps me from wrecking my car is talk radio,
Hmm.
just because it's the only thing that keeps me, like, I could smoke cigarettes or I could listen to Rush Limbaugh,
Right.
and
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
and I listen to it and it horrifies me 99% of the time. But then at the end of one Ben Shapiro podcast, he's like, my next podcast will be with Neil deGrasse Tyson. We're going to talk about religion. Neil is not an
Hmm.
atheist, but he's also an astrophysicist who has very strong views on where religion and science. And Ben Shapiro is an Orthodox Jew who has very strong feelings on Judaism, right? And I was like, wait a minute. He's talking to Neil deGrasse Tyson, who I adore, who's one of the smartest people on the planet, runs the Hayden Planetarium in New York City. I would kill to have him on my podcast.
Hmm.
All right. And that was a moment, Andrew, for me where I was like, no. Uh-oh. Like, I just lost Neil deGrasse Tyson to the dark side,
Yeah.
It's I was
Yeah.
really bummed, to be honest. Like how the fuck could Neil do that?
Yeah.
Then
Yeah.
I listened, and I got to tell you, it was. And my wife's a Lutheran pastor, so we talk about religion a lot. Andrew, it was one of the most genuine conversations I have heard between two people at all.
Hmm.
And that's not to say, if I'm calling, yeah, let's put all the data points of Ben Shapiro in the bag, right? Like, he
Yeah. Yeah.
is.
Yeah.
I don't agree with him on anything.
Hmm.
But if that podcast had been the first thing I ever heard of Ben and Neil, I would have been enraptured with just like, wow, the generosity of spirit here. Now, that's one data point.
Hmm.
And it made me think long and hard about what I listen to and why I listen to and who I give space personally to. And again, like, I don't have a good question here. I'm just saying, like,
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
absolutely respect and hear what you're saying. But I think what's hard for me on Facebook is to be like, I'm saying this because of all of the experiences I've had too.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
you said that Facebook is not. I can't actually do that. So I guess what I'm wondering is, like, would it have been better for me just to post that podcast and been like, I was blown away by this conversation? Like, what
Mm.
like, from a, and this is like maybe from a PR standpoint, like, from, if you were
Yeah.
Josh's PR manager, like, what would have been a healthier way for me as a 42-year-old to use that platform? Because I was here when the platform was invented. I was
Hmm.
one of the first users on Facebook
Hmm.
at
Hmm.
Yale when it was an exclusive Ivy League club, and I'm from a cornfield being like, I get to be in a club,
Yeah. Yeah.
and
Yeah.
but I feel like your generation you're better at using it, or at
Mm.
least you are more willing to use it. And I guess I'm wondering, like, was there a healthier way for me to say that same exact thing?
Yeah, yeah.
Or is it just better to have these? I mean, this I'm enjoying this conversation. I mean, this is maybe what I wish I would have. I wish we could do this on Facebook in real time, but none of us have that time,
Sure.
sadly.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, I mean, and like I don't know if I have. I mean, like especially in the position that I am, in the kinds of issues and the kinds of things that we're talking about
Hmm.
is like I don't necessarily have an answer, or I don't have the, like, and I'm sure you didn't expect that I would have the absolute answer or something either.
No.
And I mean, like, and I don't think we'll come to an answer out of this conversation over that either. Or and maybe like we were talking about before, maybe it's something that needs to be planted and gestate and all those kinds of things, but like yeah, I guess it's just the I mean the issue is that I'm just saying, trying to think. I mean, I do, let me say this, I do think it's really interesting that, and I have no doubts that that conversation was very genuine, and I do think that podcast must have been, it does sound very interesting to me. I think it's great. And I think that it's really good that someone like, say, Neil deGrasse Tyson let's use bandwidth, has the bandwidth
Hmm.
to have that conversation and to do that.
He's a black
And
belt. He's a black belt in conversation, and I'm like,
sure,
I got my white belt. I'm still sort
yeah,
of,
yeah. But it's just, I just try to, I guess I just try to be mindful at the end of the day of the people who like don't have that bandwidth. And I don't think the people who don't have that kind of bandwidth, for either, let's say they've had trauma that they've faced, or any of those kinds of things, I don't think those people should need to listen to those other people. I guess I know what you're saying
Mm-hmm.
fundamentally, that potentially, that if anybody listened to somebody who opposed them, that they can grow from that. But I don't think that, like what we were talking about with music before, I don't think that it should be at, and I don't think that you think it should be at the expense of someone's health either. But I just don't think that it should be at the expense of somebody's health, and it's just not as wide of a statement. And I mean, that's not even getting into the, which is the debate that I mostly have with my friend from lab all the time, is the idea of the platform,
Mm-hmm.
so like the idea is like, should we have conversations with, people like that are like affiliated with like Trump, or people like Alex Jones? Like, should Alex Jones, someone like that, have a platform? Because the fact is that like he validates and gives power to people who have very dangerous and violent views, who do things. And I mean, I'm all a believer in like hearing people out and freedom of speech, like fundamentally, and things like that. But I guess I just like realistically feel like we don't always have that luxury. And
Yeah.
some people have that luxury more than other people. I wish everybody had that luxury. And I don't. And something else I forgot to mention, like another big reason why I did comment too, is because I know that you're somebody whose music is, especially with the Steel Pan Ensemble, is very heavily engaged with things from the Black diaspora, right? Like that's like a big part of, so you're, you're somebody who is like a major pillar of an ally. Like, like you're heavily involved with that, and as you should be. And I'm sure you think a lot about that and that kind of thing.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So it's just, and maybe it's something more on Facebook side or something like that. But, when there's kind of generalized statements like that, I think it makes some people who feel like they don't have the bandwidth, potentially, it makes those people feel like they're maybe not being heard. Do you know what I mean? Like, and I
Yeah,
know that you
and
don't mean to do that, right? And that's
yeah,
why I
not at all.
commented, right?
Yeah, not at all. And
So,
I think some of the thing too that, like, I would never, maybe what I can do, well, and I don't know, maybe I'm totally not hearing everything you're saying, but like it seems like one of the things that I can get better at in terms of what I'm trying to convey to people is that, and I think I said this in one of the comments, that to the comment to you, or the reply to you, was like, to be clear, like I'm not requiring this. Like I would never force
yeah,
anybody, never force. I don't think anybody. I have no need personally for anybody to listen to the Ben Shapiro podcast. But
yeah,
for me, it helped me, and so I
hmm,
would love for, if there's anybody out there who's like has any, just as even wondering, would this help me? What I'm saying
yeah,
is it might. and give it a
Yeah.
shot, because it might actually reinforce your worldview enough so that when you're having a conversation, you don't actually get heated and start screaming. You have an emotional, you have a rational founding in a series of tools to call upon to defend
Hmm.
your viewpoint. Because a lack of anger in those conversations is what actually allows eventually for common ground and understanding. But Andrew, this is you prove my point, and I'm glad you proved my point to me, and I say that as a compliment, that I think face to face conversations about everything in life is better, and my door for this podcast is always open to you. And yeah, I'm really great. I'm really glad that I didn't just ignore the comment,
Yeah, and I'm glad
because
that I did comment, and I'm glad you didn't ignore it as well. Like if I didn't think that there was a chance for a positive engagement of any kind, whether that be in a response or now even better this conversation,
yeah,
if
yeah.
I didn't think that there was a chance for a positive engagement, I would have hid you or took you off there,
Hit the
like I've done
snooze.
with
Hit
so
the
many racist
snooze.
relevance, or like
Well, I hope I'm
relatives.
not in the racist relative category,
No, no,
but
of course, a hundred
uh,
percent, a
I
hundred
hope I
percent
have to do
not,
a lot
right?
more to get in that category than I currently have done. But Andrew, give my best to Yaz, and I'm really pumped to see the rest of the projects you're coming out with, and I've really enjoyed listening to your music, and I've enjoyed chatting with you a bunch, and I hope someday we get to sit in an international big rig and
Yeah,
roll
yeah,
over an ice road together. That would be a life dream of mine. So
and pull the horn,
if you
pull the
can make
horn,
that happen
and
for me, buddy, you're my one My dad's dead now, so I don't have any contacts
mm,
in the trucker world. So you're my one.
I'll see if I can pull some strings
I
with mine. He's going back on the road next
yeah,
week, so
I'd
I'll see
appreciate
what I
that.
can do.
Well, man, stay
Yeah,
healthy and safe, and I'll look forward to chatting with you again soon. All right.
you too, man. I appreciate being on here, so thanks.
All right. Take it easy. Bye.
Okay, talk to you soon. Bye bye.
Okay, I hope you enjoyed that conversation. This podcast is brought to you by Liquid Drum, liquiddrum.com down in Waco, Texas. My good friend Todd Meehan runs an amazing percussion company down there. Great merch, great content. Check him out, liquiddrum.com. Also, Kyle Dunleavy, dunleavypans.com, Dunleavy pans.com. Kyle Dunleavy makes and builds all the steel drums that I perform and teach on in So Percussion, as well as at NYU and Princeton. He's an amazing tuner, builder, just a really nice guy, very dependable. Check him out. If you are interested at all in steel pan advocacy, want to learn more about the goings-on in Pan in Brooklyn, check out paninmotion.com. My good friend Kendall Williams, Jerry Guy, Trisha Guy, and Arisha John run an amazing organization called paninmotion.com. Check them out. And finally, Alejandro Mirage runs an amazing clothing apparel company in Brooklyn that is steel pan centric. You can check him out at mangochow, CHOW, clothing.com. I own a bunch of his shirts. They're amazing, very stylish, beautifully made. Check them out. mangochowclothing.com. Okay, hope you're well. Talk to you soon. Bye.